Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. This is, of course, the show that takes a look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. over the last week through the lens of this second Trump administration. And joining me, as they do just about every week, are my good friends, Quick Start podcast host Dan Andros and David Brody, chief political analyst for CBN News. Guys, a busy week again here in our nation's capital, even with Congress on recess. The Trump administration this week seemingly ramping up attacks. I don't know if that's the right word, but certainly opposition to some of the blowback they're getting from the judicial system. President Trump this week called for the impeachment of certain federal judges who the White House claims are liberal activist judges, who they say are overstepping their authority, ruling injunctions against the administration that would prevent them from carrying out their policies. Chief among them, U.S. District Judge James Boasberg is a name we've learned this week. Everybody's learned the name James Boasberg this week. Appointed to the bench by President George W. Bush, elevated to district judge by President Obama. He ruled over the weekend that the deportation of the Venezuelan immigrants that the administration says were members of that violent gang using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. He ruled that needed to stop. He said in an oral statement that accompanied his written statement that any planes carrying the detainees need to be turned around. The White House, of course, the Trump administration didn't do that. They made it to their destination of El Salvador, and the White House says the order came too late. The Trump administration calling for the impeachment of judges like this, and Chief Justice John Roberts taking the unusual step of getting involved now, saying that calls for impeaching judges who rule against the administration goes too far, that there are things in place that are designed to handle this kind of thing. So, David, it seems as though what we are seeing over these last couple of weeks is a lot more resistance from the judicial branch, fighting back against some of the things that the Trump administration wants to do. Democrats say the White House's approach to the judiciary is a threat to the Constitution. Where do you land on all of this?
I land on the fact that it is indeed a battle royale between the executive branch and the judicial branch, and this is going the distance, to quote Rocky somewhere, Rocky 1 through 17. I don't know what they're up to, but that's the bottom line. I mean, this is going to the Supreme Court. And I say this, what is this? Well, we'll find out the contours as we move on here. But clearly, this is a battle that the Trump administration is itching to have. And quite frankly, it sounds like John Roberts may be itching to have it as well, though that's maybe reading between the lines a bit much. Look, if it does go to the Supreme Court, and I say we're talking about the James Boasberg case. I call it the James Boasberg case. It's not his case. Well, it is his case, but it's not about him. If that type of situation goes all the way to the Supreme Court, which I expect it will, John Roberts may have muddied the waters here. Does he have to recuse himself now from a potential Supreme Court decision on this, based on the fact that he clearly has a point of view when it comes to the impeachment of judges and the way this should be handled? And remember, that statement came after the Boasberg controversy when President Trump called for his impeachment. So I think it's going to muddy the waters even further. Look, here's the thing. I've been covering activist judges. How long have I been at CBN? I don't 21, 20. It's coming up on 22 years. I've been covering activist judges up the quote yin yang forever. I went out to the Ninth Circuit when it was liberal. It's a little bit more conservative now, actually. And so this is nothing new. I will say this idea that there are Obama judges and Clinton judges, the truth of the matter is, sadly, it's true. We'd like to say that justice is colorblind and also ideologically blind. It's not. It just isn't. And it goes on, and that's on both sides, by the way. But look, what's going on here, and I'll try to be brief, but clearly I've already failed. But this is about judge shopping, right? I mean, if you look at there's about 123 cases or so, 123 cases that have been filed against the Trump administration by liberal groups and others. And if you look at those 123 cases, by a 10-to-1 margin, it's either an Obama-appointed judge or a Clinton-appointed judge that's actually deciding at the appellate level or underneath that the case, 10-to-1. So the liberal groups are judge shopping. That's what they're doing. And then if you look at those cases specifically, at least the way the rulings are now, it's also 10-to-1 in favor of these liberal groups. So look, there's a game here. Okay. Let's just be very clear. Let's not, and those are facts. Okay. Those are facts that actually, belly the case. What's the word I'm looking for? prove the case that indeed there are not only activist judges, but these liberal groups and conservative groups know exactly where to judge shop. And so if anybody's going to go in their kind of Pollyanna, kind of utopia world that judges are not biased, give it up. They are, and it runs on both sides of the spectrum. And we should just be clear on that. So I think this is a huge development, and it's not just a development that's going to be around for a couple of weeks in a news cycle. I think it's going to be much larger. I think it's going to go on for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, Democrats have been arguing ever since the Supreme Court shifted to the right that I've seen some progressives, some liberals call some of the conservative judges activist judges they're championing conservative causes, championing the right, and certainly so. Like David said, we do see conservative judges and progressive judges, and the other thing that I've seen, people have often said that elections have consequences, and one of the things that happens when a president gets elected is they get to appoint judges, and so if a Democrat president is elected, they get to appoint judges. The Congress has to confirm, the Senate has to confirm them. There's all kinds of political machinations that go into play in getting these judges appointed, and it's been that way for forever. But some of the stats out there do indicate that that supports a conservative argument that judges are becoming more activist here as the years have gone on. In 2020, Deputy Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen said that Justice Department figures showed there were 12 injunctions in 8 years under George W. Bush, then 19 in 8 years under Barack Obama, and then 55 under President Trump in his first administration. What is your thought on what's behind all of this?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a little troubling. I think if you see this trend that you're talking about right here, the shifting toward these judges towards political activism. I mean, that's something, whether they lean one way or not, on certain issues. And so therefore, elections have consequences. Like you said, you get those. That's one thing, but to dive into an area where you won't be able to trust judges at all, I mean, even with their flaws, right? I mean, we all know, like you said, there's going to be biased judges. We're all humans. We're all flawed. But you'd at least like them to be somewhat hinged to the law here. And I don't know that we are going in that direction. I mean, look what happened during the election season. I don't know. I mean, we talked about it, guys, on this segment for weeks at a time. These charges came up on Trump, and the Democrats had a lot of fun calling him a felon, but nobody cared about it because I don't think, my personal opinion is, nobody really believed it was on the up and up. I mean, you look at the charges that were brought against him, and it was just like they had to invent a felony, and all of these things led to this, and it was so ridiculous that nobody, I think, by and large, nobody really believed it. And I do think that's actually a bad place for the country to go, to where we're not trusting that the justice system is at least somewhat reliable and a little bit free of bias, or bias proof, so to speak, on perhaps some of these issues. So that's a problem, I think, just that trust. We've seen trust polls on some of these other institutions, like mass media, the government. Yep. And they've plummeted, and we don't want that to happen now with the judicial system as well.
John, if I could just quickly say, look, here's the problem with the Boasberg case, James Boasberg. I keep calling it the James Boasberg case, which I think is pretty comical, actually. Here's the thing. He's, in essence, deciding on foreign policy. When I mean deciding, like literally deciding, like, where are the planes? I mean, he's asking where are the planes right now? Are they turn them around? What? Like, is he the president of the United States? Look, this is a political decision by the Trump administration based on foreign policy. The chief executive of the United States is conducting foreign policy as, wait for it, the chief executive of the United States. And here's James Boasberg saying, no, turn the plane around. I mean, what kind of country do we live in? I mean, that's right, insane. That's go ahead, Dan. That's insane.
No, and you're right. And I think Stephen Miller was pointing this out on a viral CNN clip, saying that, I mean, are these judges, can they interrupt troop movements? Right. If we're involved in an engagement somewhere overseas and we're moving troops around, can a judge stop in and go, nope, we're not doing that? I don't think so. So that's the argument they're making right there, because they've designated these Venezuelan gangs as terrorists.
And look, do I think this judge is going to be impeached? No. I don't, though. You never know. You only need a simple majority in the House, actually, so it could happen for sure. But here's the thing: in all of American history, only 15 judges have been impeached. Now, you say impeached, okay, so what? He's still on the bench. Remember, you got to be convicted in the Senate, and only 8 federal judges in the history of the United States have been actually convicted and thrown out. So, look, I don't think it's going to happen in terms of being convicted for sure, maybe impeached, but those chances are rare too. I do want to say something quickly about the judicial philosophy aspect of it. All things aren't necessarily equal. You know, conservative judges, sure, they have a certain viewpoint, and liberal judges have a certain viewpoint. Here's the difference. With conservative judges, they're adhering to an originalist view of the Constitution. In other words, they're kind of painting inside the lines, not outside the lines. They're going with what the original intent of the Constitution meant. Or if you want to take the word intent away and just say they're going as an originalist, basically interpreting the words that are actually there on the paper, that's a pretty, wait for it, conservative viewpoint. So you can call it activist, but I don't think that's activist as much as the liberal viewpoint. The liberal viewpoint is that we've heard this. Shall we all say together? It's a living, breathing U.S. Constitution. It's an amoeba. It kind of morphs from generation to generation. That's the philosophy. And so therefore, you're going to see more activism most likely when it's outside the lines, when you're looking at it more in those terms. And I just think that's some proper perspective here to keep in mind.
David, last thing on this. There's been a lot of hue and cry.
I'm out of material, by the way. I got nothing else, but go ahead. Yeah.
Well, we'll see if we can't wriggle one more little thing out of both of you guys here.
Ahead.
I do want to ask this to both of you guys. When do you think we reach a constitutional crisis? Because you keep hearing that being that being talked about. You know, like we're on the verge of a constitutional crisis, or we're in a constitutional crisis. I know President Trump has said on a couple of different occasions that they would not defy a court order, but certainly Democrats are saying that if they haven't done that, then they've walked right up to the line of doing so. So at what point does it reach a constitutional crisis? What does that look like, David?
I don't want to discount your question, but I'm not quite sure it matters. Look, because Democrats are going to say we're in a constitutional crisis right now. As a matter of fact, they probably thought they thought that in Trump's first term, and now it's just echoing even more and more. So truth is in the eye of the beholder, John, quite frankly. And I'm not quite sure it matters because ultimately this is all going to the U.S. Supreme Court. You know, everybody can have their machinations left and right, but ultimately the Supreme Court's going to decide whether it be on what James Boasberg is doing or DOGE being unconstitutional or not. I mean, all of this, you know, the Democrats call it a threat to the Constitution. It's a constitutional crisis. Okay, so let's go with that for a second. Let's say it is. But then the U.S. Supreme Court will decide, and that'll be that. I mean, I think we reach constitutional crisis levels when we're going past the federal judges and we're actually going and saying an administration says the U.S. Supreme Court decided this, and we're not going to abide by it. I think that kind of goes to a whole nother level, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to have this feel a little bit like gamesmanship and part of the game that you were talking about, David, when you think of things like sanctuary cities and Democrats essentially encouraging these cities to ignore federal laws, immigration laws, or rewind a little bit with the Defense of Marriage Act. Well, we're not going to force that. We're just going to ignore that now. I mean, so were those all constitutional crises? I didn't hear Democrats complaining about those. So a lot. You have to sift through a lot of this stuff and see what's politics and what's not. Usually, when a buzzword catches on multiple times, like to me, that feels more like political operative. They put out all those what do you call those tests, those trial balloons out there, the samples, and see what connects, and then put it out there in the narrative, and that's what you get. That's what it feels like to me, at least a little bit.
One more thing I wanted to add. I was thinking about this week, and I do want to get your thoughts on this real quick too. I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but I think it's important. Yes. And I think that one of the things I was thinking about as I was reading about the more, how many more injunctions we've seen from the judicial branch against executive power. One of the theories that I have that we've seen this is that Over these last, say, 15, 20, 25 years, politics has gotten a lot more tribal. We see Republicans and Democrats are really reluctant to criticize within the power base, at least up until certainly on the Republican side. We're seeing that with President Trump and hit the Republican-led Congress. The Democrats are going after eating their young right now. That's going after their leadership for how they're responding to all of this. But I think Congress used to exercise their oversight authority on the executive branch more 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. I feel like there was more country over party lawmakers than we see nowadays. And I wonder, David, if some of the reason we're seeing more activism from the judicial branch, from these district judges, is that Congress isn't doing the job of acting as a check and balance, as a co-equal branch of government, and that some of these judges feel like it's up to them to do that. Is there any logic to that? That's a wild hair of mine, but I'm just wondering what you think.
Tons of logic. As a matter of fact, if I could send you an intellectual sticker through the mail, I will do that. You get the intellectual sticker of the day, John. I don't know what that looks like, by the way. I'll probably just craft something on my local computer. Yes, that's a great point. And let me give you a specific example. Let's go back to 2013 and Harry Reid. We all remember what happened in 2013. Well, if we don't, I'll refresh everybody's memory. That was the nuclear option. We've heard of the nuclear option, right? And remember in 2013, the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, the Democrat, went ahead and said, I'm blowing things up. And what does that mean exactly? He meant that no longer would it require 60 votes to approve federal judges. All you had to do was a simple majority. And at that point, at least that was one of the key delineation moments. At that point, everything changed. It was building towards that point because you mentioned 15, 20, 25 years ago. It was building. There was a lot of animosity with, coming out of George W. Bush and waterboarding and Cheney and all of that, and then into Obama. But in 2013, when Harry Reid made that decision, Mitch McConnell looked at him and said, don't you dare do this because it's going to come back to bite you. I mean, he didn't say it like that, but I'm paraphrasing. And indeed, that's exactly what happened, because what happened was the nuclear option was invoked by Harry Reid with federal judges, 60 votes. Now it's only going to be a simple majority, which means Obama could pack the federal bench. Oh, and there's quite a few on the bench today. But what happened was when Republicans gained control, they lowered the threshold on U.S. Supreme Court nominees from 60 to 50, and hence enter Brett Kavanaugh, enter Amy Coney Barrett, enter Neil Gorsuch, enter Roe v. Wade being overturned, and we can go on and on and on. So this is what happened, and it started with Harry Reid. Everybody on the conservative side said, don't do it, and he did it, and look where it got Democrats. So I think that really began, or at least was part of the where we are today because of that key moment back in 2013.
All right, let's move on to dismantling the Department of Education. The Trump administration on Thursday announcing they are officially beginning the process of trying to dismantle the Department of Education. They can't eliminate it entirely. It takes an act of Congress to do that, but they're going to start putting the wheels in motion. We've actually already seen them start to do that. They announced that there was like half of the workforce of the Department of Education was laid off over last week, and now more of the steps are coming in terms of an executive order that President Trump signs on Thursday. This has long been a dream of conservatives. It was part of Project 2025. It's certainly, again, the White House can't eliminate the department, but they can start to really wind back and eliminate a lot of these things for this department that didn't exist before 1979. The White House put out an information sheet on Thursday ahead of this announcement, noting that math and reading scores for 13-year-olds are at their lowest level in decades. 6 in 10 fourth graders and nearly 3/4 of eighth graders are not proficient in math. 7 in 10 fourth and eighth graders are not proficient in reading. Standardized test scores have remained flat for decades, according to the White House. Those are all being given as reasons for these things to move forward. Of course, you have the other side, the NEA, putting out a statement noting that if the Department of Education is neutered, I guess for lack of a better word, hundreds of at least 150 to 180,000 jobs, teachers' jobs could be lost with Title I money going away. Roughly 7.5 million students, 15% of the population receive special education under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. There's concern about Pell Grants, funding for colleges. So that's kind of where the battle lines are being drawn right now with the Department of Education. Dan, it does take an act of Congress to eliminate the department. So what do you think the administration can do, is trying to do here?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're doing what they can on this front is, like you said, a long time goal. I mean, Milton Friedman, Ronald Reagan talked about this, and at times about abolishing the Department of Education. And there is a chart going around right now that shows, I think, sums up a lot of the frustration. And I don't have it in front of me, so I don't remember the exact numbers, but essentially it showed a line chart, and it was funding going towards students and funding going towards teachers, administrations, principals, that sort of thing. And the administrative line is just skyrocketing while the student line stays flat or goes down. And man, that's just a damning chart right there when you couple it with the statistics that you were talking about there a moment ago, John. You have this big giant bureaucracy, and what are we doing? I mean, education's always been best on the local level. And I think after 2020, in particular, when parents really started taking a look at, because they were essentially forced to, what was going on with their kids, I think they found they weren't happy. And so now you're seeing this whole fight play out with school choice and giving parents options. So I think that this is just another one of the check marks of the Trump administration sort of going after one of these things that, honestly, I think Republicans have been just too cowardly over the years to actually go after. And I think this is the tipping point, guys, where we're so used to a society where the Republicans tiptoe around whatever progressives love. You can't criticize this thing too hard because it's just always been that way. But yet then stuff like DEI just appears one day and it's just everywhere all of a sudden. And there's no debate on this. It's just, and then now you're in trouble for trying to get rid of it. That's the way things have operated for so long. And I think part of the reason you've seen the rise of Trump is because I think people are sick of that. They're like, okay, you've had your run here. All of your little pet peeve things that your sacred cows, they all go through all the time. We never get anything. And so I think that's what the Trump administration is doing on a lot of things, including the Department of Education.
100% on all of that. A couple things here. We have a slogan at CBN because the truth matters, right? So let's be clear on the truth. At least what the White House is saying, we'll see if it actually comes to fruition. They are saying that critical functions of the Department of Education are not going away. In other words, student loans and Pell Grants will be controlled by the Department of Education at the federal level. That is what they say. The biggest expenditures in the Department of Education are student loans and Pell Grants. So apparently, we understand that is not going to change. We'll monitor it. We'll let you know. But that's important to understand. Also, the unions are saying that Title I funding either could dry up or will go away. That's not possible because it's in law. It's in congressional law. It's statutory. So Title I funding, whether it has to do with civil rights or whether it has to do with those type of DOJ justice issues, that's not going anywhere. Now, could it be transferred over to the DOJ? Yeah, my sources are telling me here in D.C. that what's probably going to end up happening is a lot of these agencies, a lot of this money and these programs are going to go to different agencies, whether it be HHS or DOJ, whatever it happens to be, school lunch program, SNAP, the whole thing. So we'll see exactly how all of that shakes out. But yeah, I mean, this is obviously something that's been a long time in the making, as Dan said. Trump's got the boldness to do it. They believe they have the mandate to do it. And when you put boldness and mandates together, it's been a pretty good recipe so far for Trump. We'll see what happens with the polling. But if you're a Democrat, I mean, think about what you're for. You're for the Department of Education status quo. I mean, you're for that? I mean, who's for that? And they may argue, well, we're not for that, but we want to see changes, but we want to have a commission that would study the issue. No, people are tired of it. People are tired of it. They want change. They want action. Donald Trump is a man of action. You might not like his actions, but he's a man of action. He's a transformative president. There's no doubt. We are living history, as Hillary Clinton might say. So that's what's going on with that. And also with Democrats, same thing with DOGE. Now, listen, I'm not discounting the controversy with DOGE, and we can talk about the constitutionality of it. But the truth of the matter is, they are cutting, for the most part, waste, fraud, and abuse. Okay, we can talk about tinkering with certain programs and USAID and all that. That's fine. But they are looking, they're kind of North Star, if you will, is waste, fraud, and abuse. And there's tons of that. So Democrats are for waste, fraud, and abuse. It's a hard position for Democrats to be in. And that's why they're kind of like a bunch of Moseses wandering around in the wilderness right now. And they've got a 27% approval rating to go with them in the wilderness. It's a bad thing. And by the way, at this point, the way the Department of Education is going, I'm waiting for the memes to show Linda McMahon sitting at her desk alone at the Department of Education with a staff of one. That's pretty much what we're looking at this point, John.
Yeah, it is a unique job description to take over a department you're planning to close down. I don't know that we've ever had a cabinet secretary in charge of eliminating their own job.
Job security not good there, John.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Well, David just kind of touched on what I wanted our last topic to be here for this show, and that is, David, you did a story this week that aired on the 700 Club. It's going to air on Faith Nation about the constitutionality of DOGE, and a very interesting look. You spoke to a number of scholars, a number of legal experts about this. Obviously, there are a lot of layers to this story, and as you did your digging on the Department of Government Efficiency and the constitutionality of what Elon Musk and his group are trying to do, can you just, as best you can, summarize the main points of what you discovered?
I will, and so here it is, because there are a lot. This is a labyrinth. There are a lot of different tentacles here, but let me just give you the bottom line. Here's a question every American has to ask themselves: is Elon Musk a senior advisor to the president, or does he actually have authority to make cuts? That's in essence, the kind of the real question to all of this. Because if he has authority, then the appointments clause comes in. In other words, he has to be confirmed by the Senate. If he's a senior advisor, knock yourself out. There's been tons of senior advisors. I mean, Alexander Hamilton was a senior advisor to George Washington. I mean, this goes back for a long time. Abraham Lincoln had tons of senior advisors. But if Elon Musk is actually making the decisions, that's different. And that's where the constitutional rubber meets the road, if you will. And so then it gets complicated because, well, we've heard conflicting things. I mean, right? We've heard from Elon Musk's own mouth. I mean, he said, we got to make the cuts. I got to make the cuts is what he's talking about. And then another interview, he'll talk about how, I'm just advising cabinet secretaries on what to do. Well, what is it? All right, well, let's go to the commander-in-chief, President Trump. Well, he said a couple of different things. Specifically in one appearance in the Oval Office, and we played the sound in the piece, he said that cabinet secretaries are going to make the cuts. And then he said, oops, but if they don't make the cuts, Elon will make the cuts. Well, if you're a senior advisor, should you be making the cuts? You see where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
So look, there's a whole host of issues here. We haven't even gotten to the vesting clause. Stephen Miller in the White House will argue that all of the power is vested in the executive, the chief executive, Donald Trump. And if he wants to put Elon Musk in there as a senior advisor to do what President Trump tells him to do, then that's okay. But who is making the calls? And I think what we've seen in the last week or two is some of the dialing back from the White House, them going out of their way to say cabinet secretaries are in control. And we've actually seen stories now, right? The Marco Rubio and the Elon Musk kind of tete-a-tete in the cabinet meeting. We've seen other reports and stories about how cabinet secretaries are frustrated because I think the delineation lines of like who's doing what is confusing. And one last thing, and I'll just end it here. Chris Ann Hall, who's the constitutional attorney who was in the piece, part of First Liberty Institute, she made a great point. She said part of the problem here is that when the White House called it DOGE, which was right, everybody at the time was like, oh, cute, Dogecoin, got it, the meme coin, it makes sense, Department of Government Efficiency, sounds really cute and kind of ha-ha. No. So here's the problem. They put it in an executive order. What did they put exactly? They put this keyword, department. They called it a Department of Government Efficiency. The minute you put a department, it's not an advisory council in writing, though Chris Ann Hall said It is an advisory council. DOGE is, and we can get back to what Obama did, taking over the USDS. I don't want to get into. See, now I'm going down a rabbit hole. I'm going down a labyrinth hole. The point is that Chris Ann was saying the minute they put Department of Government Efficiency inside the executive order, judges will look at that and go, okay, it's a department. So there, and you put Elon Musk in charge of this department, even though there's this supposed administrator of the department. But let's be honest, what Donald Trump has said, and even at the State of the Union, stand up, Elon, you're doing great stuff at DOGE. I mean, it wasn't the administrator who was standing up, it was Elon Musk. Look, you put it together, and that is the concern about whether or not this will actually be ruled constitutional or not. I hope I explained it well. If not, I confuse myself, but then again, I confuse myself often, gentlemen.
No,
I really do.
I think you explained it beautifully. And Dan, my question for you on this too, it has to do with like the social media aspect of these two men, of President Trump and Elon Musk. I mean,
right.
They're constantly tweeting things out or putting stuff out on Truth Social that I question whether or not it could get them in trouble legally if this thing goes before a court. Some of the things that Elon Musk has said, it sounds like he is making decisions with authority as like the head of a department, as David was talking about. And same thing with Donald Trump. What are your thoughts on kind of like some of the legal hot spots that these two guys could be getting themselves in with social media? I mean, here's social media could do this whole thing in.
It really could, and I've got friends of mine and I have joked that X, formerly Twitter, the only thing it ever does is cost people their jobs. Like if they just never would have been on there in the first place, they wouldn't have lost their job for the dumb thing that they said. But it is true because Trump and Musk are both playing the PR game as well as trying to actually move these things along. Like they're trying to get buy-in, they're trying to get momentum on these things, and they have massive followings, obviously, on social media, given their profiles. So you have that going on, but Trump in particular has never been super specific with his language on these things. He likes to just kind of say it in the Trumpian way that fits for a good TV show, right? Like that's sort of his mode. That's his vibe. But they've got to button this up on the messaging, as David's report really showed, like, the differences in the things that they say, like advisor or I'm making the cut. They got to button that stuff up because the Democrats have shown they will go after you legally on almost anything. So you've got to be like doubly buttoned up on your language and be ready for that and say, okay, we know they're coming. And so we're going to say it this way and we're going to be very precise and we're going to be specific so that when the heat comes, you got no worries.
Well, in the past, Donald Trump has talked about, I'm talking about in the past, like back in the 80s and 90s, he used to say, what I speak in truthful hyperbole, is what he called it. Well, knock yourself out. That kind of works with voters to a degree. You've been president twice. It might not work in court. And Chris Ann Hall, this is the specific thing she said, because Dan, you made a great point about Donald Trump and his language, so to speak, not that type of language, but a little bit more specific language. This is what Chris Ann Hall said to me, quote, and by the way, Chris Ann Hall is a conservative, so you should understand that. She said this, quote, he, being Donald Trump, he's not a very specific communicator and he enjoys speaking in hyperbole, which ends up creating confusion. And that in a court of law is a recipe for disaster, gentlemen.
Well, folks, I would encourage you to watch all of David's story. I believe if it's not there as I'm talking right now, it will be up on cbnnews.com so that you can check it out. There's a lot of interesting information in there and decide for yourself how you come down on it. But really good story by David on the constitutionality of DOGE. And as far as navigating Trump 2.0, we're going to have to leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me once again this week on Navigating Trump 2.0.
Thanks, John.
All right, John.